Thanks, everyone. You've had a long day, I know, but I'm your last speaker. Cheap applause line. I want to thank you all for being here. Thanks for your good work. And thank Vernon for what he's done here with moderating, as well as your great leadership here of the AFL-CIO in Philly. So my first qualification is Bob Casey is one of my best friends. There we go. My second one is what you heard. I grew up in a union family, and I wouldn't be here because of unions. My grandpa worked 1,500 feet underground in the mines. He didn't even get to finish high school because his parents were sick. He had 9 brothers and sisters, and he left. He became a Teamster, and then he worked in the mines the rest of his life. And he saved money in a coffee can in the basement, he and my grandma did, to send my dad to a 2-year community college. And then my dad ended up becoming a newspaperman and a sports writer. Okay. Okay, he covered the Vikings. And okay, I watched that playoff game. Don't think I don't know what happened. And then, of course, we hosted you guys for the Super Bowl. But in any case, my dad wrote about the Vikings and the Twins, and he covered sports and wrote a newspaper column, and he was a proud member of the Newspaper Guild. Then my mom grew up in Milwaukee, didn't have money in her family, and she moved to Minnesota because of the strong teachers union. And she taught 2nd grade until she was 70 years old. So I stand before you today as the granddaughter of a union miner, the daughter of a newspaper guild union writer, the daughter of a union teacher, the first woman elected to the U.S. Senate from the state of Minnesota, and a candidate for President of the United States. That is what unions are about. That's what unions are about, this idea that no matter where you come from or who you know, that you can make it in this country. And that's what my campaign has been about. I am someone that doesn't come from a lot of money, as I said. My husband grew up one of 6 boys, and he grew up in a trailer home with 5 brothers. And we got to Washington and have got a lot done since I've gotten there. But my major focus has been on the economy and helping our workers and making it better for everyone. So I'm proud to be here with you who are doing that every single day. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Going to throw the same 4 questions at you that all the other candidates here today have answered.
Okay, so. I'm in suspense.
No. Let's first start by having you tell us about your personal experiences with organized labor. You already have told us about your family background. How would you describe what you've done in your lifetime to help workers join unions for a better life? And please be specific about what you've done in Minnesota and since you've come to Washington.
Okay, very good. Well, one thing I did want to add about my personal experiences, when my grandpa worked in that mine, it was really dangerous, those first decades, and my dad would still remember going to the Catholic Church and seeing the caskets lined up, and my grandma would always tell me about how the whistle would go off and all the wives would run to the mine, and they never knew whose husband or dad or brother was the one who was hurt or killed. And that was a weekly occurrence in those mines. And then labor came in. So it wasn't just about organizing and better wages, it was about safer conditions and advocating for those safer conditions. That made such a difference for my grandpa and allowed him to finish up and retire. And my dad also worked there for a few summers. So that was one thing I didn't mention I wanted to say about labor. The second thing about what it's meant in my life and what I've done. So after I finished college and law school, I went back to Minnesota, and I eventually ended up running for county attorney, that's what we call it, instead of DA in Minnesota. But the job was about prosecuting on the felony level, but it was also about representing the county, the biggest county in our state. That's about 1/4 of the population. And so one of my jobs was to enforce the prevailing wage laws. And I put a full-time lawyer on that. And we made sure that we helped not just the workers in our county, but all over the state. And so that's one way where I thought in my job that's going to make a difference. I also had my employees were AFSCME employees. And they did a great job. And one of the things I found out when I got in there was that they were outsourcing a lot of the legal work, the civil legal work, to private law firms. And I brought a ton of it back in, and our lawyers were proud to do it, and they did such better job. We got better decisions, and the cost to the county went down using union workers, right? So there's one example. Then I got to the Senate, and it was around that time I, like the rest of you, saw what was going on in places around the country where these right-to-work laws were coming in, and I had the personal experience of seeing it right next door in Wisconsin. You could see, and maybe you've heard about this, the difference between Minnesota and Wisconsin for that decade. Because Minnesota kept strong labor laws in place, and Wisconsin on the other side, of course, went after unions and put in right-to-work laws, went after every kind of union possible. And the difference between the economies was pretty stark in terms of Minnesota's economy taking off. We also invested in education. We invested in infrastructure. We had been run by Republicans for years until I got in. Actually, I know you don't think that about Minnesota, but when I got in, we had a Republican governor, and Pawlenty, and we had the other senator was Republican, Norm Coleman. 3 or 4 of our constitutional officers were Republican, and none of them were friendly to unions. And so gradually we changed it around, and then you could see this difference with the economies between Minnesota and Wisconsin. You saw the differences in the kinds of jobs people had, and the worker protections, and the kind of benefits they had. And finally, the people of Wisconsin thought they had enough. And if you don't believe me, I have 4 words for you. Former Governor Scott Walker, right? And that was a lot because of the AFL-CIO. And so in the Senate, at the beginning, when Bush was president, it was hard to get things done. Then we improved the NLRB some. And I did a lot on infrastructure and working with our unions because that bridge collapsed in Minnesota, which was only 8 blocks from my house, actually. And when I announced my candidacy for presidency in the middle, on an island in the middle of the Mississippi River I don't know if you saw it, there was like 4 inches of snow on my head because it was a blizzard. And I picked that place because it was right near that bridge. And that bridge falling down in the middle of a summer day, killing 13 people, is what really motivated me and inspired me to make infrastructure one of my #1 priorities. And it's actually, I led the bill in the Senate a few years back for infrastructure, and then it was my #1 plan that I put out running for president, was a $1 trillion infrastructure plan. And so that was what got me involved in working with our workers and making sure we got a bunch of great projects after we changed the politics. We changed the politics. That great Viking Stadium, yes. That was, of course, a union project. We built a bridge to Wisconsin that I was very involved in, and that was a big union project. So we've done a lot of infrastructure projects in Minnesota over time. And then, of course, and maybe we can talk about this later, I strongly supported bills like the one we have right now to protect the right to organize and make it easier to organize. Because I believe that unions don't just help union workers, they help all workers. And our economy is strong when unions are strong.
Senator, we're witnessing the largest redistribution of wealth in our nation's history. While the richest 1% of Americans own 40% of the country's wealth, working families are struggling, working harder than ever, but their paychecks are not growing commensurately. Unions help level the playing field for working families by giving workers a voice on their jobs. They're able to advocate for family-sustaining wages, benefits, safe working conditions, and pay equity. In a Klobuchar administration, if you're elected, how will you help strengthen labor unions and rebuild the middle class? What specifically can you do to get that done, will you do?
Well, first of all, you got to go in there and decide it's a priority and not just make fake promises to people that like Trump did. And I think as leaders in the union movement, that's going to be on all you to talk to the other members because we know what happened. We know a number of union members believed him when he said he was going to put a bunch of money in infrastructure. which he hasn't done. They believed him because his name was on a bunch of hotels, right? And it sounded like a lot of people believed he was going to really build something and get things done. And so I think the first thing that you've got to do for this election, and that I have to do, is make it clear that he has made these promises to workers that he hasn't kept. And every time when the economy was going good, right, he gloats about how great it is, when in fact, you know, it's your workers that got us out of that downturn and that were resilient. And we got to a point where we were employing people. Then he comes in having nothing to do with that, and gloats about it when he's president, and then when things start going wrong, right, when he makes a mess of things and has got problems with plants closing, or he's got the farmers in trouble, or he's done a bunch of things that created problems, then he just starts blaming everyone. He blames the head of the Federal Reserve, he blames unions, he blames Barack Obama. I'm sorry, he's gone now. He blames the entire country of Denmark. So when I talk to people out there, I said, especially working people, I'm like, you know, we do not need a whiner in the White House right now, okay? People don't need someone that's whining all the time every time something goes wrong, because their lives are a lot harder than Donald Trump's. And I just think that is the case that we're going to have to make to people, because I know a lot of people in my state actually. Hillary almost lost our state. It was her smallest margin of victory in the country. And we know what happened in Pennsylvania and what happened in Michigan and Wisconsin. I'm actually going on this Blue Wall tour that we're starting in Philly tomorrow morning. This idea that there are these states that should be blue that we lost, that we've got to really focus on. And so what I would do, first of all, I'm from the Midwest, and one of only 2 candidates that was on that debate stage from the middle of the country. And I don't view the middle of the country as flyover country. It's like where I live, okay? And I know how important it's going to be to win those states, including this one. My husband, I mentioned, is the third of 6 boys, and they would take a vacation every summer in their station wagon, and he was always the quiet one in the middle. And they would always, of course, stop at a gas station and all load out. And there's a story that I have not verified, or at least his mother won't admit that's true, that not once but twice my husband got left behind at the gas station. So my view of this upcoming election, the first thing I'll tell you from my perspective, if I lead the ticket, is that I will not be leaving Wisconsin or Michigan or Iowa or Minnesota or Pennsylvania behind at the gas station. Okay, that's first. The second is the kind of policies that you support. And I mentioned a few of these, but we have got to make it easier to organize, not harder. Put good people on the NLRB that understand unions and understand the importance of unions, and the bills that we need to pass, including things that make it easier to get reinstated, that make it higher penalties on employers when they violate the law. There was an incident out of Pennsylvania, I know, of an employer, a famous case, was surveilling workers and trying to stop them from organizing. And these are the kinds of things that we've got to up our laws and up the enforcement of our laws to make a difference. Better people on the NLRB, judges, so you don't have the kind of mess that happened after Janus, making sure that there are judges that understand how important our unions are and enforce the laws and not try to make laws themselves by how they interpret cases. All those things are things that I think are really important if we're going to move ahead, and getting rid of right-to-work laws are very important, as well as putting in law that we're going to allow public sector workers to organize. And I know you have work that's going on here right now in Pennsylvania on some of these topics. So I want to thank you for that, for the work you're doing at the state legislature.
Recently, Philadelphia lost the largest oil refinery here on the East Coast. It's devastating to a lot of families and wage earners, and the pain of that closure is being felt right now. The energy industry is, of course, a source of millions of jobs across the entire nation. What about your feelings about the transition to green energy jobs? You've offered general assurances about a fair and just transition for energy workers into those green energy jobs. including union jobs. Everybody said there'll be plenty of union jobs there in abundance. But the details, the timelines remain very wildly different and sometimes murky, to be perfectly honest. The federal government has given more than $170 billion in subsidies for windmills and solar farms over the last 18 years. Carbon capture technologies are largely ignored, but they are vital for many reasons. So the question becomes, what is your message to the millions of workers in the energy sector who care about their communities as well as the climate and believe it can be balanced off? It doesn't have to be one for the other. But many people think an aspiring president deserves to give a very clear answer about that issue and green energy jobs.
Very good. Well, thank you. I'll stand for this one because it means a lot to me personally, which you're about to see why. But I have supported these 45Q, the tax extensions in the past, and I believe that as we look to more renewable energy and wind, solar, hydro, you name it, that we are going to have to make sure there's transitions, and we've got to do this right. Let me tell you why, for me, it's so important to do this right, and why a major part of my plan is not only making sure these are union jobs as we invest more in renewables, but also that when we see that transition, and you know we're already seeing it, you know this in Pennsylvania in coal, and we're already seeing some of the closures of these plants, really not as much to do with government as just a change in the market. And so why is this so important to me? Well, I told that story about my grandpa when he was a miner, but what I didn't tell is that he lost his job when the mine closed down. And that would happen all the time up in northern Minnesota. The mines would open, then they close down, then they open. And at one point it was so bad that outside of Duluth, they had a billboard up, and it said, the last one that leaves, a billboard for outside of a major city, the last one that leaves turns the lights off. That's what they said, because of what was happening with plants and workers and manufacturing. And my grandpa ended up getting a job as a logger, but it was something that I heard about my whole life growing up. And so for me, it's going to be very important that as we move, because we know climate change is a serious thing, and I said the same thing I'm saying right now. I didn't say a different thing at the climate change forum that we had when we were in New York a few weeks ago, where I also said, by the way, that no, I would not get rid of cheeseburgers. All right, thank you, thank you. But thank you, one person, thank you. But what else I said there was that we can't do this unless we have a plan and we put actual money in to investment to train our workers as these jobs change, like we're already seeing in places like West Virginia and Pennsylvania. And for me, the way you do it is you don't just have the green energy jobs, right? You have incentives, tax incentives, other things for investments in these communities for manufacturing. And it doesn't just have to be for green energy. And some of the people have limited to that, and I think that's a mistake. I think you have to do it for green energy, yes, but you also should do it for other kinds of manufacturing so that we make sure that people are able to train and retrain. And you know the great union training that you all do. I've been in so many of these training centers, and I'm a big believer in apprenticeships, union apprenticeships, and the work you do. And we're going to have to do this in a big way in these areas that are going to be seeing change as we know our country is headed, and I think we are, to change in the kind of energy that we use. So that's the way I look at it. I look at it from not just the head, but the heart. And that's why I want to lead this ticket.
Senator, how will a Klobuchar administration's health care plan protect and build on and enhance union members' access to quality health care coverage, for which they fought so hard for so long to win? And some of your colleagues even think that should go away and it should be, what's going on there.
Okay, I kind of had a little dispute about this at the debate. Now, I don't expect that you all watched the debate, but we had thank you again, people out there. There was a discussion about this because I have long supported your rights to bargain for your health care. And I have long supported making the Affordable Care Act better by making the changes that we know we need to make with the health care tax, and we won't get into that right now, but that's one issue. But then the second thing is, how do we bring premiums down, and how do we bring health care costs down, and how do we cover more people without hurting the people that have the coverage now? And that's where I go to the public option, something we always wanted to do, to create some competition with the insurance companies instead of getting rid of all insurance in 4 years, like that bill says. The bill is well intended. The moment I'm referring to in the debate was when my friend Bernie, and we are friends, in fact, we both debated on CNN together as a pair, debated the Republicans when they were trying to repeal the Affordable Care Act. But I said, he said he wrote the bill, and I said, I read the bill. And on page 8, it actually says that everyone, 149 million Americans that have private insurance, including your union members, would lose that current insurance in 4 years, and that's what it says. So that's why I have such concerns about that bill, however well-intentioned. So what I think, given that we all have the same goals, and one of the things that bothered me about this debate is there's so much more that unites the Democratic Party on this issue than divides us. And there is so much more that unites Bernie and me and others in our party when it comes to health care. And so let me talk about that. We want to cover more people. And I just figure this public option idea where you get the insurance companies out of it and it's an option that people can buy into. You could do it with Medicaid or Medicare. You could do it either way is the best way to get people covered that aren't in your situation. And not everyone here, I'm sure I shouldn't cover everyone, but a lot of our union members have good insurance. And so we want to make sure that other people at least are able to access that. And so that's why I think the public option is the best way to do that. The second thing I would do when it comes to health care to bring down costs, which would help all of you as well, is pharmaceutical prices. And those have just been way too high. Nothing's really been done during the Obama administration, actually, because it was hard to get the votes for it, and now. And, you know, Trump went on Fox News and he said, this is a quote, that he was going to bring pharmaceutical prices down so much it would make your head spin. That's what he said. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, and it's made people's heads spin. It's made people's heads spin because they've gone up so much. 4 out of 10 of them have gone up in like double digits. And I actually brought to the State of a Union this woman named Nicole Smith-Holt, and she had a son, and her son was a restaurant manager in the suburbs of Minneapolis. And he worked hard, and he turned 26, so he had aged off his parents' insurance. So then he had his own insurance, and it didn't have good coverage for pharmaceuticals. A lot of them, as you know, have high copays. And he was getting into, which a lot of union policies are better than that, but he was paying like $1,000 a month for this insulin all of a sudden. Insulin, a simple drug that hasn't changed at all. And so then he started rationing it because he couldn't afford it. And he ended up dying just a few weeks after he got off that health insurance. A guy working a job as a general manager at a suburban restaurant in the Twin Cities. I've talked to seniors that are keeping drops of insulin in their injectors. I mean, it's an outrageous situation. And that's part of this has happened because a lot of the pharma companies think they own Washington. Well, they don't own me. And I think what we need to get is we need Medicare negotiation so that we're not locked in on Medicare for those prices. That was 43 million seniors. And you know a lot of seniors that like to get good bargains. Well, picture 43 million seniors. And Medicare should be able to negotiate better prices just like the VA or the Medicaid does. That's one thing. Stopping this process where big pharmaceutical companies pay off generics to keep their products off the market because that limits competition. That's a very bad thing. I was just asking about that at a hearing this afternoon. Doing something about antitrust. I'm actually the highest ranking Democrat on the antitrust committee. And I just love the big round of applause on antitrust. But actually it's a union issue. It's not just a healthcare issue, because when you look back through history, This is actually a really cool story. If you've heard a lot of stuff today, I know, but I bet this is a new thing that maybe you didn't hear about. On antitrust, when you go back through history, what happened was only a few companies were dominating things, right? And that's when we had like the Pullman strike. Remember the Pullman rail, the porters and things like that? They were dominating the market, Rockefeller, all these people. So what happened was the workers were getting screwed because their wages were so low, because there was no real competition, and it would be one company boss setting the wages. So the unions started striking around that time in our history. That was when we had the Haymarket strike in Chicago and other things. And they started striking at the same time. The farmers, this is interesting for what's going on right now, the farmers were starting to protest what was going on because they were also getting screwed because they'd only have like one seed company or one rail company to use. And what came out of that were these antitrust laws which tried to break down these big monopolies. And right now we have big monopolies in other ways, right? We have these new companies, these tech companies that come in that are monopolies in their own ways. We have pharma monopolies. And it's really not, I don't think, a coincidence that as you see rising public support for unions, which is such a good thing, at the highest level it's been for a long time, you also see concern about these monopolies. So that's something else that I would really take on. I've got a bunch of the bills to take on these big companies and consolidated interests, and that's something else I would do as president, because I think that is part of the problem as well, and that would help even beyond healthcare. So that was a really long answer for your question about union healthcare, but I actually think that we've got to make sure that we just can't let all these sophisticated lawyers and these companies and these economists, they're just like running ramshot over us, because these things used to be pretty simple because the unions would take them on, and way back even Republicans were on our side on this, Teddy Roosevelt, right? They took this on in a political way. And now it's just become all this thing about lawyers and economists. And so we've got to take it back, just like we do with union organizing, and take back these antitrust laws in a much more political way to take on these big interests, because they have just been running things for too long. And that would get me to my last thing about how we change healthcare, and that is just making it easier for people to vote. You see all over this country people being left out of our democracy. They do messy things so that they can't register to vote. My state actually has the highest voter turnout. It did when I was leading the ticket last time in the country. And that's because we make it easier to vote. You have same-day registration, so you can go on and vote. Easier for students to vote, easier for young people to vote. I have a bill that says when kids turn 18, as long as they're eligible to vote, they should be automatically registered to vote across the country. Well, think of why can't we do that? If we can get people's social security numbers and driver's licenses, we should be able to do that. So that's a big thing that you can do. You can also get all of this bad money, this corporate money out of politics by overturning Citizens United with a constitutional amendment. And I noticed in our state, we took back 2 House seats, just like you did in Pennsylvania, where you flipped the House seats and helped change the House of Representatives back into the People's House again. One of our candidates in a really pretty Republican area, she ran an ad about people standing up on like hay bales trying to talk. They're trying to talk, and then it showed that they were muted, so you couldn't tell what they were saying. The message of the ad was that these big money interests were stopping people from talking. And it was an ad that looked like it could run in any rural area in the country. But it made me think again about how this isn't just a Democratic-based issue, right? People don't want to be shut out and shut down by big interests. So it's a lot of the case that we're going to have to make as I look at what I talked about with that blue wall, the states we have to win, Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin. That is about standing with our unions, that's about standing with our workers, and it's about making that case that we can't let the big interests run all over us. All right?
Senator, let's get a question in from the audience before we wrap up. Yes, sir. Your name and affiliation, sir.
Good evening, Senator. My name is Joe Smolzinski. I'm an organizer with the Communication Workers.
That name sounds like it's longer than Klobuchar.
Almost.
And that it even gets more points in Scrabble. But
It's a
maybe
typing
not.
test.
Yeah,
Yes, it is.
I see. Yeah, okay.
My question for you is, by simplified definition, the Department of Labor's Office of Labor Management Standards is tasked with regulatory oversight of unions, while the National Labor Relations Board is tasked with holding employers accountable and protecting working families. The President's budget proposals have included significant budget increases for the OLMS and significant budget cuts for the NLRB. This stacks the deck even further against working families in favor of big corporations and the 1%. What do you view as the greatest flaws in the existing system, and how would you allocate funding to the OLMS and the NLRB?
Okay, those are great points. And this is a good place to kind of end. I'll go to say a few remarks at the end. But one of my experiences has been, we want to get better laws. We talked about those, the things that we want to put in place. And by the way, I'd add increasing the minimum wage, right? We want to get those things. We want to have better pensions. And we've got some huge pension issues going on. And I figure promises made should be promises kept. And that is a big elephant in the room. But you can change laws, but what really matters is who's in charge of those laws and who enforces those laws. And if you don't believe me, look at what this Trump administration has done when it comes to these cases that keep going up to the courts, right? They are not on your side, and that's a case that you're going to have to be making. When it comes to the budget, which should be a value statement about who we are as a country, where we put the money, they're starving those very agencies, as you so well point out, those agencies that are supposed to protect workers and make those cases and bring those cases and investigate those cases so you can figure out how else would we have known about that case in Pennsylvania where they were surveilling workers and where they were going after them and taking their jobs away just because they were organizing. You get to the bottom of that because you have the people in place, not just the laws, you have the people in place and the resources in place to investigate it. You think about these sophisticated companies that I just brought up, right? Well, how are we going to have an even playing field if they're more sophisticated than what we've got on our side? So a lot of that is about having the budgets and the people in place to do that. So I just want to end by thanking all of you, thanking you for staying till the end. Yes. And thanking you for standing up for working people and just reminding you, and you know this because of what you did in 2018, the march that we're on, it started the day after the inauguration, right? After Donald Trump is sworn into office, when millions of people marched all over this country. That happened. And the day after that, 6,000 women signed up to run for office. That happened. 9 days in, when people spontaneously showed up at airports to protest some of the stuff that he was doing to refugees and to immigrants. And by the way, the AFL-CIO has been so good about standing up for immigration reform, which has meant so much to those of us that are fighting for that. And then you go forward to the summer when the Fighting 48 Democrats, from Bernie to Joe Manchin, we all stood together and we said, we're not going to let them kick people off their insurance for pre-existing conditions. And we won. We beat them up because we stood together. And then you go into the fall where there were these legislative races. And one of my favorite ones was this guy in New Jersey who said that he hoped the women would be home in time to make dinner after the Women's March. He got defeated by an African-American woman, right? That happened. Or you look in Alabama, where a victory for workers' rights and dignity and decency and against racism, Doug Jones won his Senate seat in the state of Alabama. That's the march that we are on, that went to last fall when you all stood up for those House candidates and helped re-elect my friend Bob Casey. And you have greatly changed what the makeup of the state and who's in charge of this state. You have done that. So all I'm asking you to do is to do it on the most important election of a lifetime. How many of you times have you heard people say that? But do you believe me this time about 2020? This is it, man. This is going to determine the future. And I believe we don't just want to win, we want to win big. because we want to win big, because we want to keep those House seats and add more. We want to win the U.S. Senate. We want to win big, because that's the only way we're going to get these things done that I just talked about. So if you feel like you're kind of caught in the middle of some of the extremes sometime, I tell you, you have a home with me, all right? Because I am someone that believes in getting things done, and I want to be the president not for half this country, but for all this country. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Very well. Appreciate it. Welcome. Thanks.